All right, in this live teaching, I want to talk a little bit about the stage display and a few of the things that you can do with this. We're just going to sort of touch the surface of what's possible with stage displays, and we can kind of jump into more details in future trainings, but this is just sort of a general overview. So let's take a look here at ProPresenter. You may be familiar with a few of our stage displays. If I were to change this preview window over to stage screen 1, you can see that it's actually indicating what our presenter would see from the front of the room on the screen that's behind me. These stage displays can be formatted differently. There's lots of ways to do that. If we look at our, I can't remember what they call this section, the show controls, we actually have various ways that you can display screens. So let's say I want the stage screen to be the service host view. The difference between our standard display and our service host view is that the service host view also includes pictures, and that can be handy for a situation like this where we want to show him an upcoming picture, or maybe like in our send out we generally have additional pictures, and so you might want to give him a preview of what's on screen. So I'm going to come back into let's just choose a song and let's take a look at the songs. Now in this particular case, if our stage screen were to show the service host view, the worship team is actually not going to be able to read the fonts because they're so small. This particular setup is essentially mimicking what they would see on the front screen, so the font size isn't right. So let's go ahead and choose this and go back to live. You can see a huge difference here. On the left is the current slide that we would see on our front screen. So in this case, there's a God who weeps, there's a God who bleeds. Let's show the front screen. Oops, I didn't clear my slide. There's a God who weeps, a God who bleeds. All right, so obviously a different view on the back screen, but then on the right side you also have your preview. This is what's coming up next. As you can tell, it matches the upcoming slide. And so as we click through our slides and as we're presenting, they can use this as a confidence display up front. It helps them in case they're forgetting some lyrics or they get stumbled up or anything like that. Also on our stage display, we have other elements. As you can see, there's some timers and clocks and stuff. These are things that are very important for the way that we run our services. So let's look a little bit more into the stage displays. I already showed you how you can make a change in the lower right in our show controls to indicate the stage displays differently. You can also change those screens under the Screens tab. And if we go into the Stage section, Stage Screen 1 is the one that's directly behind me. We can make a change to it, and let's say we want to go to the Service Host view again, and it automatically changes the screen that's behind us. And again, on ProPresenter here, you're just seeing the preview in that top right corner. We can change those screens here, so I'm going to go back to our live view. Also within this same menu, we have the option to edit these layouts. And so let's go ahead and edit one of these layouts and see if we can make a new stage display. So now that we're in the editor, we can actually see various stage screens that I've set up in the past, and they all have different purposes, but let's just see if we can identify or just create a usable stage display. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the plus button on the side. It gives me a few templates that I can choose from, and these are things that ProPresenter has built into our software in hopes of making it easier for us to utilize these tools, but we can also create them from scratch, which is what we're going to do here. So I'm just going to create a blank screen, and it just put it up underneath the one I was on before. No problem. I'm going to rename this example because that's all we're going to use it for. And I'm left with just a simple blank screen. Now this is great because we can make some changes to this as needed. So a few things we want to do. So we'll hit the plus button. And first thing is we want to do a screen preview. I'm sorry, not a screen, a current slide preview. The current slide is that one that we saw on the left side. It tells or it shows the presenters what is currently on screen, and we want the text version of that. Okay, it gives me a box here. It's labeled text, current slide text, and I can reshape this box. And the way that we had it on our screens is we brought it all the way down here into the lower corner. It was about centered up and nearly to the top. All right, so that's our current slides. We also need a upcoming slide, so that's our next slide. And we're going to use the text format again. I got another box here that I can reshape and move. So we're going to go ahead and drop that into the lower right corner. We'll match up the center points on this guy. All right, so we've got our current slide, our next slide. I generally like to change the text inside here a little bit just to indicate that there's a difference. So current slide will be a white text. The next slide we could do something like maybe a gray, like a light gray. It's just a slight difference. That way they can see it that way. We need to adjust some of the sizing. So we could take this current slide and just make our font larger. That would be simple enough for them to see from the front. What happens if we have enough information on the screen that it overflows with this particular font size? When something like that happens, we want to make the stage display prepared so that it can resize as needed. So we want this to be our font size, but we want it to also shrink down if the content is larger than what fits. That's what our scaling section is for. So right now it's not going to scale anything. If we have more text than what fits on here, it'll just overflow and you don't see it. So choosing scaling, we can then say we want the text to go down in order to fit if there's more on a slide, and that text size will just get smaller. We just have to be careful with that to make sure it's still visible from the stage. Now, just to give us an example, it's an extreme example of what this could look like if we choose different scaling. On the current text slide, we'll go ahead and make its font size the same. But this time with scaling, we're going to say we want the text to go up if the text is maybe smaller than what would fill that screen. This may be quite drastic, but you can see here what's going to happen. If there's only 3 words on a slide, that text is going to be massive. If there are fewer words, you get what I mean. All right, so this is an extreme example. It will fill that slide no matter how much text you have in there. All right, so let's just say we were happy with that change. We also have a few other things we want to add in here. I'm going to want a planning center timer. Here at Mercy Hill, we actually use Planning Center to keep all of our service elements on time, and we follow a pretty tight schedule. So I'm going to go ahead and put a Planning Center timer here. It is just a tiny little box, but I'm going to expand that. And let's see, you can use various keys. So right now I'm holding the Option key while I drag in order to proportionally scale that. And so we got a Planning Center clock here. It is kind of striped out here with the yellow. And the reason for that is because the Planning Center clock is actually a web page that gets loaded inside of that box. We don't have any control over the content of that web page as far as like the styling of that. And so we just need to make a box big enough to hold that content. And I'll show you how you can feed the content to that particular box here in just a minute. But now we've got a Planning Center clock. We will have this on almost every stage display that we have within Mercy Hill because Planning Center is so important for us to keep everything on schedule. Now, it's also nice to have a clock, just a simple clock. And we want to know what time of day it is, so we're going to choose System Clock. It gives me a very large box because we certainly could customize this to be as big or as small as we need. I'm going to drop that clock all the way up here in the top left corner, and we'll resize it just so it fills this entire space. And you can see our text is rather small, and it will display that small if we don't make a change here. So we want to go ahead and scale that guy up. Let's say we go 75. I don't know, we could actually even go larger. Let's say 90. All right, so we've got a clock up here, and it is formatted in this format, hours, minutes with a PM. You can change the formatting. So let's see. Down here in the lower right, under your text section, there's a linked text. We could say we don't want a date, but we do want time, and here's our different formats that we can choose for time. So if we actually wanted to have seconds on there as well, we could add that. But for the general purpose of why we might use a clock, hours and minutes with AM or PM is perfectly fine. But if you wanted to get kind of creative and have this plus, actually, let's go ahead and do it. Got a second? I'm going to shrink this clock down. I'm going to duplicate it, which gives me a second version of the clock. Let me drop this in underneath. We'll resize it. But I don't have any need for 2 clocks. What I actually am hoping to do here is put the date. So I'm going to turn off the clock, and we will choose a date instead. There we are. So now I've got a date that fits. This plus indicates that something is overflowing. The text box or the box size is not big enough for the text. So let's go ahead and shrink this down a little bit more. Hopefully we can get it all to fit. Or maybe that plus is just indicating that there's a possibility that if the date was something like November with a larger word, it wouldn't fit. But either way, we've got something that fits right now, so good to go. Now on the top right, we also want to have a timer. This particular timer is how long a video is going to last. So we do our announcement videos at the beginning of service. The announcement videos make it possible for our band to know, or the timer for the announcement video makes it possible for them to know when they need to start, when the next thing is coming. So let's go ahead and give them a timer for that. I'm going to shrink this down. We'll drop it up here in the corner. And formatting works very similarly to the way that the system clock did. So we'll just put a quick format on that for us here. We'll say our font size is going to be 60. We're going to ignore the hours because rarely are we going to do a video with hours. We're going to take the hundredths of a second. We're going to take that guy off of there. So we just have minutes and seconds for our videos. There's also an option in here that indicates to ignore this counter when it is a looping video. Where this applies is, for example, we have our background slide that goes behind the text of our worship song, and that's just a looping 30-second video. There's no need for us to have a timer up there that counts down from 30 and then restarts and counts down from 30 again. Those looping videos don't really need a timer. However, the videos that we use like for our announcements or our countdown video at the beginning of service, those are very handy, and since they don't loop, the timer will show up. And so this is sort of like a case by case. Do you want this timer to always show or not? I'm going to go ahead and make it always show. So I'm going to untoggle the looping option here, and that timer will just always be on anytime that there is a video playing. Now, if we hit this plus button, you can see that there may be other things that we could add in here, but what we're seeing right now for a stage display is actually very similar to what we would generally use for our services. But if you just wanted to spend some time in this section, let's just say, for example, I wanted to have this cool little box. Anything like this can be added to your stage display. You just need to think about layering your elements. And speaking of layering, if we look down here to the lower left, we can actually see that there are various layers for each element that we just created. So let's say, for example, I put this box over here on top of the E of the word slide. It is actually covering that up because the box is on a higher layer. So if I were to drop this down to a lower layer, we'll put it at the bottom, the box will actually show up behind. That's just an example of how layering works, and you can certainly use that to your advantage. So now we have this crazy example screen that we have created, a layout. Now let's see it in action. So I'm going to go back to our show. And over here on the right, I'm already showing our stage screen. I can choose in our show controls under the stage to change this to our example, or I can go into screens, which is where I'm going to go, stage screen 1. I'm going to put the example up here. And you can see we now have our stage screen that we created showing up here. Completely not useful, but just so you know, this is how you create that, this is how you change that, and things are showing here. Now our planning center timer is stuck on minus 2016. That's because it's actually showing us a web page of an event that is already completed, and we probably finished just 20 minutes over. That's why it's showing that. The way that we will update that timer is we go into our view menu, which you may or may not be able to see in the screencast. But in the view menu, if we go to Planning Center, it's going to pull up a Planning Center view, and we can choose in the top right of that window a particular event. So I'm here at the High Point campus. I'm going to go ahead and choose our next High Point gathering, which will be March 27th. And as I select that, it has updated the clock to show when the next part of that particular event happens. So in 6 days, there will be some sort of rehearsal. That's where things start there. Now we have the clock displaying as needed. All right, there are a few other things you can do with a stage display that don't necessarily affect what's happening in the room. I can actually use a stage display to give me this really nice multi-view over in my preview window that can be helpful for just tracking with things as I'm operating ProPresenter. So let me show you an example of that multi-view. If I hit this pull-down menu, I go to double screen. And the way I've done this is I've actually created an additional screen within ProPresenter that I can send information to, and it's actually just a placeholder screen. So let's take a look at how I built that. If we go to Screens and choose Configure Screens, I can see that I have one audience display and I have two stage displays. One is labeled Stage Screen 1, which is what we were operating with before, and the other is double screen. And this is, you can see the proportions of that particular screen are different. So our stage screen is wide, our double screen is tall, and I had to do a bit of math and trial and error to figure out what size to make this screen, but it is simply a placeholder screen. But I can send information to a placeholder. If I wanted to make another screen, I can tap on my plus button, I can make a new placeholder, I can pick a custom size for that. That's how you create a screen within ProPresenter. Now the cool thing is our preview window can show us all screens that ProPresenter is sending information to. So in this case, I have a double screen option that's showing this. If we look into our show controls, we've been operating mostly on stage screen 1, which is the part that affects the screen that's physically in our room. I can change that back to our live display so we're not using that busted up screen that we just built. But that should have affected the screen that's behind us. Now in our double screen, there is actually a separate section where we pick a different layout for that particular screen. And right now I've got one created that's called Front and Rear, and it basically shows us the front screen on the top, front being what the audience looks at in our room, and then it shows us rear screen, which would be in the back of the room, and we can see those both here within the double screen view. Let's take a look at this layout real quick and see what makes that layout happen. So I'm going to choose Screens, Edit Layouts, and I'm going to find that one that we were on for the double screen, which is labeled Front and Rear. And as you can see here, we've actually got a slide that has been sized to match our double screen. We have a few elements. The first at the top is actually a screen preview of screen 1, screen preview of our audience screen. And then below we have a screen preview of whatever screen's happening in the back of the room, our stage display. And then we have a couple of text items. We've got one text that just labels that top part as front. We got another text item that labels the bottom as rear. And then we have a line in the middle, and I just created that line by creating a rectangle and then shrinking it down, and that just gives us a little divider here. Now you can get really creative with all the things you put in here, but since our stage display already has things like our timers that we use, information like that, we can keep this particular screen simple. So when I go back to show, you can take a look. Here's the preview of our front screen. Here's the preview of our rear screen. As I click through different slides in the service, I'm actually seeing both the front and the rear are affected by that. You can also see the dissolve transition that's happening on our front screen. Anything that is being displayed out there, whether it's a video or anything else, will show there. In fact, let me show a video real quick. Okay, you can see that it actually displayed up front with the full screen countdown. There was no text to be shown on the rear screen, so we had nothing there, but the timer in the top corner had started showing because there was a timer going in relation to that video. Hopefully that's enough information to at least jog your creative juices in relation to using our stage displays and using those screens in different ways. And also now you know how to edit one. If there was a need to make a change, you can find that layouts menu in order to make the change that you need. Now each of these placeholder screens could actually be other screens throughout your building. So for example, at Regional, we actually use a very customized screen that has very creative elements, including our cameras get fed into them. And so I send that video to our backstage TVs for anyone who is backstage, whether it's a pastor waiting to go on stage, or a worship team, or somebody who's just kind of reviewing our service to keep our service flow well. Those screens actually have tons of information, and I use our stage displays to send that information out through an actual physical output of the computer. So hopefully, again, that gets you an idea of what you can do with our stage displays and various screens and layouts within ProPresenter. I'll cover more on that in the future, so keep checking back.